Low volume, high intensity, progressive overload. Back, biceps, traps, rear delts. Today, I'm walking you through my current pull training session, where we focus on a few key movements for each body part, hitting only one single working set for each exercise. No reps left in the tank. Basic, old school, heavy, progressive iron. Now, make no mistake, there's no magic in doing just one single set, and that's not the point of this video. The results here come from good old basic progressive overload and driving those logbook numbers up over time. Now currently, my training volume is at its lowest at 6 to 8 working sets per muscle group weekly. Now, keeping that training volume in mind, I still personally like to have a decent amount of exercise variety. So one single working set for 3 to 4 different exercises is my preference for this training. Now, let's get some weight on the bar, iron in our hands, and let's get to work as I walk you through this session. First exercise we're going to perform is for the lats specifically, and that's the wide grip neutral lat pull down. Well, this exercise is excellent for hitting the entire upper back. By grabbing a neutral grip, I'm going to keep my elbows out in front of the body as much as possible, even with this wider grip. And I'm not only going for a deep stretch at the top, but I'm personally pulling the bar all the way down to the clavicle, right near the throat. That's going to really allow me to crunch down on those lats and get a very solid squeeze. And after 3 to 4 progressive warm-ups here, we're doing just one heavy working set, no reps left in the tank. Notice, I'm not recommending training to failure here, but rather doing the last clean rep possible. The goal here is for every rep to be performed with the same range of motion, and I'm aiming to pull that bar down forcefully to the clavicle or upper chest on every single rep. As soon as I can no longer bring it down to that same range of motion, that's when I count the last clean rep. Now, keep in mind, I'll personally still do an additional 1 to 2 partial reps at the end of the set to ensure that I took that set as far as I could. I don't want to think after that one set, what if I could have done more? I want to know for sure I milked that set for everything I could. But those extra partial reps, those are not counted and those are not tracked here. Those full range of motion reps, those are the standard and those are the ones that I'm going to aim to beat next session. Traditionally, wide grip pull-ups will be my go-to movement here. They're responsible for a lot of my overall back development. These days, I tend to rotate movements in and out of my training a lot more frequently. And these two movements are things that could be interchanged. But if you don't have a solid strength foundation on pull-ups, don't skip them thinking that pull-downs are superior. Being able to pull your body weight up for 5 to 10 reps, plus an additional 25 to 50 pounds, that will pay off massively in your physique development, as well as have a lot of strength carryover to many other exercises in the gym. Next movement that we're moving on to is another pull down variation. And depending on how you set up the angle here, this can be more of a pull down high row hybrid. This one I'm doing is purely lat specific. The goal here is to keep those elbows as tucked to the sides of the body as possible. We're doing this for the most lat activation, and there's no better way to keep that elbow tucked than to do this with a single arm handle. Now this movement, contrary to popular trends today, doesn't really require a very deep stretch or range of motion. I know everyone talks about maximizing the stretch for hypertrophy, but you have to understand that even if there's a benefit to it, which there is, that doesn't mean that every exercise you do in the gym has to be done for a max stretch to have any benefit. An exercise that might not have an extremely deep stretch for a muscle isn't completely useless. We just stretch the lats really deeply on pull downs. Now we're contracting the hell out of them with this angle here. If I fully extend my arm on this exercise, some of the tension will come off the lats. So I'm only going about 75 to 90% of the way up here, right before that tension stops. From there, I'm driving my elbows down as hard as possible. If you're doing this correctly, you should almost feel those lats completely cramp at the bottom of the movement. Again, just one single working set here after a few progressive warm-ups. Pyramiding up in weight just to acclimate myself to the heavier loads, and then it's just one single set of 10 to 15 reps. After this set, your lats should be maximally pumped. Now, normally, I'm a big advocate of lower rep sets, especially on compounds. But exercises done with cables, and specifically a lot of lat specific training, I like to use a lot more higher rep sets to keep the technique more solid. Now, if I load it up with a weight that I can only do 6 to 8 reps on this exercise, I can definitely get a good stimulus. But eventually, as I get stronger and I need to add more weight, it starts to become increasingly difficult to keep the tensions on the lats specifically. So with a movement like this, you have to balance your body weight, you have to keep your torso stable and in line. Now, lowering the weight on this and aiming for 12 reps or so, that allows me to keep the intensity sky high and not having to divert my attention to keeping my body stable here. Next exercise, and arguably one of my favorite back movements of all time, and apparently one that I'm in a deeply committed relationship with, according to the internet, and possibly a movement that 90+% of guys on the internet just are too lazy to do, and instead just shit on it so they can feel better about themselves for not doing any of the hard things. I personally love the hard exercises, and sometimes I don't even care if they're optimal or not. All I'm interested in is making my body grow, and the basics, they work very well for that. Now, normally, I'd always train these first in the session, especially when I was younger. I'm 35 now, and I've definitely racked up some more wear and tear on the body over the years, although I'm never giving up full heavy training. But doing these now, while my upper back and lats are already fatigued from the previous exercises, that allow me to take less warm-up sets needed here, as I'm not going nearly as heavy as I would if I was fresh. And I'm also going to perform these off of a box to increase the range of motion, which as a result, I'll need to use less total weight. Now at this point in the workout, I'm also going to opt for a bit more stability here. So I'm going to perform these on the Smith machine. This is another great alternative that the Smith machine can be very useful for. Now because my lower back hasn't been trained yet today, I'm going to start with 3 to 4 progressive warm-ups here, just as if I was fresh early in the workout. And then once I'm up to my heavy weight, I'll perform one single working set of 12 to 15 reps here. Barbell rows are an extremely demanding exercise if done properly. Now doing them at the tail end of your workout or mid-workout, it's brutal for sure. Personally, I love doing these with a regular barbell, but I'll also interchange it with the Smith machine periodically. Normally, I'd use a regular barbell here, but since my lats and my whole back are already super pumped, doing them in the Smith machine, now I'm literally just squeezing and contracting my entire back as hard as I possibly can under resistance. But if you don't have access to a Smith machine, just grab a barbell. Do those rows bare bone style.
Stop being a bitch and come on.
After we've hammered those lats, we've hit the full back from the top to the bottom with barbell rows. We're gonna finish off our back work by targeting the middle and the upper back specifically. And to do that, we're gonna do a chest supported dumbbell row. Since our lower back is a bit fatigued here, we're still gonna continue rowing, but we wanna emphasize the muscles that we wanna use to do the majority of the work. So this movement is very targeted. I'm not just trying to move weight from point A to point B here. I'm trying to pull those elbows back and squeeze the middle and upper back as much as possible. This is another movement where you're not necessarily going to hit a sticking point at any point in the rep. There's really no definitive failure point in this set where you just can't bang out any more reps. Rather, what happens is at a certain point in the set, the range of motion is just going to start to drop off. When this happens, there's still plenty of gas left in the tank. So if I want to make sure that I'm fully milking this set, I'll still do a few more partial reps until I can no longer get any quality reps. However, the only reps that I'm counting are the full range of motion reps. That's where the rep count ends, and that's what I'm aiming to beat over time. 4 exercises for the back, 2 lat specific, 2 middle and upper back specific, and that's it. Next, we're gonna hit some rear delts and traps before we finish off with some biceps to end the session. This next exercise is a bit of a unique one, the rear delt bent over row. Although you might still think that I'm targeting the back here, we are still getting some stimulation to that muscle group with this exercise, but the technique makes it primarily a rear delt movement. We're gonna load up an easy bar here, and we're gonna purposely use 25-pound plates on the outside. We want the lip of the plate facing out. This will allow us to get a greater range of motion than we would with a 45-pound plate. And as we grab the plates on the outside, this forces us to pull the elbows all the way out. From here, the goal is just to pull those elbows back as far as possible with each and every rep. This movement is all about squeezing those rear delts. It's not about moving heavy weight. We did plenty of heavy work so far already. If we try to turn this one into a heavy row where we just muscle the weight, the bigger, stronger muscles of the upper back are going to take over. Smaller muscles require progressive overload as well. But remember, they have to be the muscles doing the work. Otherwise, they're not going to grow. Next movement that we're moving along to is going to target the traps and the upper shelf of the back. This is a movement that I never really did early on in my training, specifically for all the nonsense that people say about them. Apparently, if you do any type of upright row, your shoulders are just gonna fall off. I mean, if they cause you pain or if you have any shoulder issues limiting you from doing these, then fair call, don't do them. But if you wanna keep your shoulders healthy and mobile, doing these safely and properly, it's not a bad idea. Not to mention, they're awesome for a massive pump, especially in the delts, the upper back, and the traps. In my opinion, no other movement ties all those muscle groups together as well as this one does. Now, for safety reasons, I do like to keep these at higher reps. 20 plus reps here usually feels pretty comfortable. And personally, I'm really a fan of doing these with a rope on a cable, as it just gives my elbows and wrists a bit more freedom. But as you can see, when I started my set on these, the rope attachment just broke. So I just went ahead and did some easy bar today. These worked out fine. Now, we trained the traps already with plenty of indirect work on the upper back exercises and rows. We also hit upright rows, Now we're gonna finish off those traps with one shrug variation. Today, we're hitting Smith machine shrugs. Now, if you're hitting your heavy presses and your pulls, shrugs are really just the icing on the cake for the traps. Dumbbells and barbells and something like a Smith machine shrug, they're all viable options here. And I suggest rotating through these exercises as long as you can keep progressing on them. This will keep anything from becoming stale long term. Warm up as needed, then get to one productive heavy set. Alright, all the hard stuff is done. Now, it's time for the fun stuff. Biceps to finish off this low volume, high intensity pull session. For biceps, I always like 3 variations. One to load them heavily with free weights, one to stretch them deeply, usually cables are good here, and one that's for a really good squeeze. Now I have multiple variations that I like to use for each of these, but generally I try to have one exercise that fits into each one of these categories in each session. We're going to start with one that's really going to emphasize the squeeze at the top of the movement, the straight bar cable curl. Now after one solid working set here, you should already have a solid pump. Now we're going to load those biceps heavily with one movement. Today, that's the seated dumbbell curl. Personally, at this stage in the game, I like to do these seated, simply because I can load up a ton of weight due to my strength on this movement. And if I do it seated, I can keep the exercise a bit more strict. Sitting down allows me to lock in and really avoid excess momentum. All right, last bicep exercise and final movement for the day. Single arm cable curls. Facing away from the machine for that deep stretch. A couple warm-up sets as needed here, then one all-out working set. That's it for today's pull session. 10 total working sets for the back, the rear delts, the traps, and the biceps. Focus on progressive overload, beat that logbook long term, and you'll have no problem building muscle mass. And if you want the exact training programs that I personally recommend to build more muscle using proven old school bodybuilding methods, check out my old school mass gain training system down below. And as always, if you want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.